This is a moment in Jewish history. My name is Ben Bresky, and this week I'm going to interview Walter Bingham, who is a journalist and reporter. He is the host of Walter's World on Israel National News and Israel News Talk Radio, and his articles can be seen in the Jerusalem Post. When Walter was young, he was in the Kindertransport. Recently, he participated in a reenactment of the Kindertransport, and he traveled to Germany just coincidentally when the war started. So, Walter, I'm sure you have a lot of interesting things to say about your trip and about the unexpected events that happened in Israel just as you left.
Well, yes, we were scheduled to do this recreation of the Kindertransport, and then the war broke out on Shabbat, but we still went on the trip on Sunday. When I say we, there were 3 ex-Kinder who were still fit to travel. I was the oldest. I was almost 16 when I went on the Kindertransport. My colleague, George Sheffy, he was 7 or 8, and then there was Paul Alexander. There were 3 of us, and he was 1 year and 7 months old, so he talked about various other things of his youth. The organization that organized it were March of the Living. March of the Living are best known for their marches from Auschwitz to Birkenau, but that's not really all they do. They're involved in very many other things. This was one of their events. So we flew out from Israel to Berlin. George, who came from Berlin, was interviewed at various places that he remembered from his youth. By the way, our kosher food was supplied everywhere by Chabad, very kindly. The next day, we went to a monument in Berlin, and we were photographed and interviewed there. And then from there, in the early afternoon, we already went on a train across Germany, about 6 hours, to the city of my birth, Karlsruhe, which is totally on the other side of the country. The next day, I had 3.5 hours of filming at various locations in the city of my birth. And in the afternoon, once again, we were on a train, changing at Cologne on the way to Amsterdam. Did some filming in the morning. In various places are monuments to the Kindertransport, and those were the main places we went to. And the next day, from Amsterdam, we went by road to the Hoek van Holland, which is the port north of Amsterdam, where we took a ferry to England, to Harwich. Actually, Kinder were transported to that place, to the Hoek van Holland, from all over Germany, Austria, and the by then occupied Sudetenland. But all Kindertransport went via Hoek van Holland, via that port, and from there, by that kind of ferry to Harwich, that's the port in England, and from Harwich by train to London, Liverpool Street Station, one of the main stations in London, and everyone went there. And at the station, on the platform, children were sorted out or divided according to the ticket, I suppose, we had around our neck to their various destinations. Then there was a ceremony in Hyde Park, a religious ceremony with the chief rabbi. That was the end of the official trip.
And what did the Germans that you met and the British people, what were their attitudes?
Well, it was different from 1988 when I was invited to that town of my birth by the municipality, who were very nice, but the population didn't seem to care about us. Nobody smiled, nobody laughed, nobody waved at that time. This time it was different. We were approached by locals in Germany. Even in Amsterdam, I noticed they were very interested. But of course, you know, we made what you call in Yiddish a gerede. You couldn't miss us because we had 2 cameramen, a soundman, and lighting, and so that was quite a commotion in the street, naturally. But they were friendly, they were interested, and they were very happy to see us. I'm not sure about all, but many. On the whole, the atmosphere was so much different. Of course, it was already war, and people had already heard about the tragedy that happened. So it was quite fresh, and people were aware of it. So the Germans were different from what they used to be. Just as an aside, this week the president of Germany was in Israel, and the president of the Bundestag of the German parliament were also here, and they spoke glowingly about Israel and their support and how much they're on our side, and that is the German government.
Was it just a different attitude in the 1980s of a different generation? Or was it the circumstances?
I suppose you're quite right. I suppose there was a different generation from 1988 to now. One mustn't forget that immediately after the war, the generation were the children of those who voted for Hitler, the generation of Nazis, and their children were still indoctrinated. And it takes several generations to take the poison out of their system. And today, thank God, I think it's much better. There is an element of neo-Nazis, but that is relatively small, and the main bulk of the population, I think, have woken up to the fact that they were duped by the Nazis.
You know, Walter, there's some people who would say Germany, we should never set foot in that country ever again, but it was important for you to go there, and I'm curious why.
Well, whenever I talk to someone about Kindertransport in the past, they immediately brought up the name of Dr. Schonfeld or Nicholas Winton. Now, both of those men were, in my view, tzaddikim, because each one of them on his own initiative saved something over 600 children. And they were very much publicized, particularly Nicholas Winton, who was non-Jewish, and everyone knew about that. But very few people seem to know about the Kindertransport. That gave the whole thing the name and saved thousands of children. And so it was very important for me to take part in this, to make sure that that particular event is publicized. And it was.
International Children's Day takes place every year on the 20th of November, and some Israeli newspapers, including Ma'ariv and Israel Hayom, noted that the Kindertransport recreation and commemoration took place coinciding with International Children's Day, and they also tied it in with what's happening in Israel today with the hostages, many of whom are children. And with that, Walter, I want to thank you for coming on, and if you have any final words you want to share with the listeners.
It is very regrettable. It's regrettable that those of us who had to endure the horrors of the Nazi regime have today again live through these tragic events.
This has been a moment in Jewish history. I will be posting articles about Walter's recent trip, as well as links to his podcast, Walter's World, on benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and shalom.